London, 1842. The grand ballroom of Lansdowne House gleamed under the light of 100 candles, illuminating the cream of society as they whirled across the polished floor. The season was at its height, and tonight's gathering promised to be the talk of the ton for weeks to come. Diana Fairfax stood near a column, observing the proceedings with barely concealed disdain. At 22, she was considered dangerously close to spinsterhood, a fate that concerned her not in the slightest. Her golden hair, which had earned her the nickname the lioness among her small circle of friends, was arranged in an elegant style that complemented her emerald gown, a shade bolder than most young ladies would dare wear. "You appear ready to flee at any moment," came a familiar voice. Her cousin, Elizabeth Harrington, approached with 2 glasses of champagne, offering one to Diana. "How perceptive of you," Diana replied, accepting the drink gratefully. "These affairs grow more tedious each season. The same people, the same conversations, the same desperate mothers parading their daughters before eligible bachelors." Elizabeth sighed. "Not all of us have the luxury of your independence, Diana. Some of us must secure a suitable match." "Independence? Is that what you call my situation?" Diana's lips curved into a bitter smile. "My father's moderate fortune prevents me from starving, but hardly grants me the freedom I desire. Were I truly independent, I would be in Oxford studying alongside my brother, not trapped in these gilded cages they call ballrooms." Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden hush falling over the room. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, and Diana knew, without turning, who had arrived. "The Duke of Silvermere," Elizabeth whispered unnecessarily. Diana stiffened. Robert Ashworth, the 7th Duke of Silvermere, had a reputation that preceded him wherever he went. At 35, he was one of England's most powerful men, and certainly its most arrogant. Rumour had it that Queen Victoria herself sought his counsel on matters of state, though Diana found that difficult to believe. What monarch would trust a man so cold? She turned slowly, determined to appear unimpressed by his entrance. The Duke cut an imposing figure as he moved through the room. Tall, broad-shouldered, with hair as dark as midnight and eyes the colour of a winter sky. His features were too harsh to be considered handsome by conventional standards. A strong jaw, high cheekbones, and a mouth that rarely smiled. Yet Diana could not deny the power of his presence. "They say he's in search of a wife this season," Elizabeth continued, her voice barely audible. "After that scandal with Lady Harwick last year, his sister convinced him it's time to settle down." Diana snorted. "What unfortunate creature would willingly tie herself to such a man? I pity the woman who becomes his duchess." "Many would consider it an honour," Elizabeth countered. "The Silvermere estates are among the finest in England, and his fortune is immense. And what good is a fortune when it comes with a master who demands absolute obedience?" Diana's voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby guests. She lowered it again. "I've heard how he treats his servants, his tenants. The man believes himself a law unto his own." As if sensing her criticism, the Duke's gaze swept the room and locked with Diana's. For a moment she forgot to breathe. Those pale eyes seemed to strip away her defences, examining her as one might a curious specimen. Then, unexpectedly, one corner of his mouth lifted in what might have been amusement. Diana looked away first, unsettled by the encounter. The evening progressed as such evenings typically did. Dancing, gossiping, the strategic forming and breaking of social alliances. Diana danced twice, both times with gentlemen she had known since childhood, and declined all other invitations. She was counting the minutes until she could reasonably depart when disaster struck. She had retreated to a relatively quiet corner to escape an overzealous mother intent on introducing her son, when she overheard a conversation that made her blood boil. "The girl has no choice in the matter," came a deep, authoritative voice she instantly recognized as the Duke's. "Her father agreed to the match, and the papers are signed. Whether she weeps or rejoices is immaterial." Diana peered around the potted palm concealing her position. The Duke stood with Lord Kensington, an elderly peer known for his conservative views. "The young these days have such strange notions," Lord Kensington replied. "My granddaughter speaks of love as if it were a prerequisite for marriage, rather than a possible outcome." The Duke's laugh was short and without humour. "Love is a poet's fancy, not the foundation of a successful union. Compatibility of rank, fortune, and bloodline, these are what matter. The Harcourt girl will learn that soon enough. Diana recognized the name immediately. Emily Harcourt was barely 18, sweet-natured and painfully shy. They had met at several social functions, and Diana had taken a liking to the gentle girl. "And if she continues to resist," Lord Kensington asked. "Then she will be reminded of her duty," the Duke replied coldly. "Women must be guided firmly, like spirited horses. They may resist the bit initially, but eventually they yield to a strong hand." Something snapped inside Diana. Before she could consider the consequences, she stepped from behind the palm, facing both men directly. "What a fascinating perspective, Your Grace," she said, her voice ringing with barely suppressed fury. "I wasn't aware that women and horses were interchangeable in your estimation." The Duke turned slowly, his expression betraying momentary surprise before settling into cool assessment. Lord Kensington sputtered in shock at her interruption. "Miss?" the Duke inquired, one dark eyebrow raised. "Fairfax. Diana Fairfax." She executed a curtsy that was just shallow enough to be interpreted as an insult. "And I find your views on marriage not merely antiquated, but reprehensible." The ballroom around them grew quieter, as nearby guests sensed the brewing confrontation. Lord Kensington murmured an excuse and retreated hastily, leaving Diana alone with the Duke. "Miss Fairfax," he said, his voice deceptively soft, "you appear to have strong opinions on matters that do not concern you. When one man speaks of another human being as property to be managed, it concerns us all," Diana replied, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. She knew she was committing social suicide, but could not stop herself. "Emily Harcourt deserves better than to be bartered like cattle." The Duke stepped closer, and Diana caught the scent of sandalwood and something uniquely masculine that made her pulse quicken despite her anger. "You presume much about arrangements you know nothing of," he said. "I suggest you mind your tongue in matters beyond your understanding." Diana raised her chin defiantly. "I understand perfectly well. Men like you believe your title grants you ownership over others' lives. It does not." By now, a small circle had formed around them, guests pretending to converse while straining to hear every word. Diana was vaguely aware of Elizabeth trying to catch her eye from across the room, her expression horrified. "You will cease this display immediately," the Duke commanded, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying the force of an order. It was the command that did it, the absolute certainty in his tone that she would obey, as if her compliance were as inevitable as the sunrise. "I will not," Diana replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "Unlike Emily Harcourt, I am not yours to command, Your Grace, and I pity any woman who finds herself subject to your authority." The ballroom fell completely silent. The Duke's face remained impassive, but something dangerous flashed in his eyes, not anger precisely, but a kind of predatory interest that sent a shiver down Diana's spine. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. Not the tight social smile he had worn upon his arrival, but something darker, more genuine and infinitely more disturbing. "How fascinating," he said softly, his gaze never leaving hers. "A lioness among lambs." The intensity of his stare made Diana's cheeks flush hot, with a confusing mixture of anger and something else she refused to name. Her legs felt suddenly unsteady, and her heart raced so violently she feared it might burst from her chest. That single look conveyed something beyond words, a promise, a challenge, a claim, and for one terrifying moment, Diana felt as though the ground beneath her feet had disappeared entirely. Before she could respond, the Duke inclined his head slightly, a mockery of deference, and turned away, effectively dismissing her. The gesture was somehow more infuriating than any retort could have been. Diana stood frozen as whispers erupted around her. She had publicly challenged one of the most powerful men in England, and rather than crushing her as expected, he had looked at her with, what? Interest? Amusement? Desire? Whatever it was, Diana knew with absolute certainty that this encounter would not be their last. The Duke of Silvermere was not a man who forgave insults or forgot them. As she fled the ballroom minutes later, her reputation in tatters and her cousin's reproaches ringing in her ears, Diana could still feel the weight of his gaze upon her, stirring emotions she had never experienced before, emotions that both frightened and exhilarated her. The game, it seemed, had just begun. The scandal of Diana Fairfax's confrontation with the Duke of Silvermere spread through London society like wildfire. By the following afternoon, there was not a drawing room in Mayfair where the incident was not being dissected with relish. Diana sat in the morning room of her family's townhouse on Curzon Street, attempting to focus on her correspondence while ignoring the pounding headache that had plagued her since awakening. The previous night's events replayed in her mind with merciless clarity. "What were you thinking?" her father, Sir William Fairfax, demanded as he paced before the fireplace. A gentleman of moderate means and impeccable lineage, he had built a respectable career in diplomatic service before retiring to manage his modest estates. The Duke of Silvermere, of all people. You might as well have insulted the Queen herself. Diana set down her pen with careful precision. "I merely spoke the truth, father. The man was discussing poor Emily Harcourt as if she were a broodmare, and it was not your place to intervene." Sir William's face was flushed with frustration. "Heavens, Diana, you are 22, not some green girl who can be excused for impulsive behaviour. What am I to do with you?" Before Diana could respond, the butler appeared at the doorway. "Lord and Lady Harrington request an audience, Sir William." Her father sighed heavily. "Show them in, Simmons." Moments later, Diana's aunt and uncle swept into the room, their expressions grave. Lady Harrington, her mother's younger sister, had always been a voice of moderation in family disputes. Today, however, she looked unusually serious. "William, Diana," she greeted them tensely. "We came as soon as we received your note." "Catherine, Edward," Sir William nodded. "Thank you for coming. As you've doubtless heard, Diana has placed herself at the centre of a most unfortunate situation." Lord Harrington, a portly man with kind eyes, patted Diana's hand awkwardly. Now, let's not be dramatic. Young ladies have weathered worse scandals." "Not with the Duke of Silvermere," Lady Harrington said grimly. "William, you must understand, the Duke is not a man who tolerates public defiance. When Elizabeth told us what transpired," she shuddered delicately. "Has there been any response from Silvermere House?" Lord Harrington inquired. Sir William shook his head. "Nothing yet, though I've prepared a letter of apology." "I will not apologize," Diana interjected firmly. All three adults turned to stare at her. "I meant every word I said, and I would say it again." "You most certainly will not," her father exclaimed. "Diana, you cannot comprehend the damage you've done. The Duke's influence extends far beyond social circles. With a word he could ruin your brother's prospects at Oxford, dash my hopes for the land purchase in Kent. So we are to tolerate tyranny for the sake of advantage," Diana challenged. "That seems a poor bargain." Lady Harrington sank onto a nearby chair. "Child, you speak of principles when you should be thinking of practicalities. The season is barely half over, and now no respectable gentleman will come near you for fear of offending the Duke." Diana was about to retort that she had little interest in the attentions of respectable gentlemen when Simmons appeared again, looking distinctly uncomfortable. "Sir William," the butler announced, his voice unusually strained. "His Grace, the Duke of Silvermere, requests an immediate audience." The room fell silent. Diana felt the blood drain from her face. "The Duke is here? Now?" Sir William whispered, aghast. "Yes, sir, in the entrance hall." Sir William straightened his waistcoat with trembling fingers. "Show him to the drawing-room. We shall attend him directly." As Simmons departed, he turned to Diana with a desperate expression. "You will apologize, daughter, immediately and sincerely. Our family's future may depend upon it." Diana rose shakily. Despite her brave words moments before, the reality of facing the Duke again sent a wave of anxiety through her. Still, she would not cower. "I will be civil," she conceded. "But I will not grovel." The drawing-room of the Fairfax townhouse, while tastefully appointed, paled in comparison to the grandeur the Duke surely enjoyed at his own residences. Diana was acutely aware of this as they entered, to find Robert Ashworth standing by the window, his tall figure silhouetted against the afternoon light. He turned as they entered, and Diana was struck again by the sheer force of his presence. Today he wore a perfectly tailored dark blue coat that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, a gold waistcoat, and buff trousers. His cravat was tied with elegant simplicity, and a single diamond pin was his only adornment. He looked, Diana thought unwillingly, like a man who had no need to prove his worth through ostentation. "Your Grace," Sir William bowed deeply. "This is an unexpected honour." The Duke's gaze swept past him, past Lady and Lord Harrington, to settle on Diana with unnerving intensity. "Sir William," he acknowledged with a slight inclination of his head. "Lady Harrington, Lord Harrington, Miss Fairfax." Her name on his lips sent an inexplicable shiver through Diana. She cursed without meeting his eyes. "I trust you will forgive the intrusion," the Duke continued, "but after last night's encounter, I felt a private conversation was warranted." Sir William hastened to respond. "Of course, Your Grace, my daughter deeply regrets—" "Actually," the Duke interrupted smoothly, "I would prefer to speak with Miss Fairfax alone." A shocked silence followed his request. Propriety demanded that an unmarried woman never be left unchaperoned with a gentleman, particularly one with the Duke's reputation. "That would be most irregular, Your Grace," Sir William stammered. "With the door open, naturally," the Duke clarified, a hint of amusement in his voice. "I assure you, Sir William, your daughter's reputation is safe with me. What remains of it, that is." The subtle barb made Diana's head snap up, meeting his gaze directly for the first time. The challenge in those pale eyes was unmistakable. "I have no objection," she said, before her father could refuse again. "Father, aunt, uncle, please allow us a moment." After further protests and assurances, the three reluctantly withdrew to the hallway, leaving the drawing-room door conspicuously ajar. Diana could practically feel their anxiety radiating through the opening. For several long moments after they departed, the Duke said nothing, merely studying her with that same unsettling intensity he had displayed the previous night. Diana refused to fidget under his scrutiny, though her heart pounded traitorously. "You are either very brave or very foolish, Miss Fairfax," he finally said, his deep voice deceptively casual. "I've found those qualities are often indistinguishable, Your Grace," she replied. The corner of his mouth twitched. "Indeed." He moved away from the window, approaching until he stood just beyond the bounds of propriety. "Do you know why I'm here?" Diana lifted her chin slightly. "To demand an apology, I presume, or to threaten my family with ruin. Is that what you think of me?" The question seemed genuinely curious rather than offended. "I think you are a man accustomed to having his will obeyed without question," Diana answered honestly, "and I defied you publicly." He studied her for another long moment. "You misunderstand the situation between myself and Miss Harcourt." This was not what Diana had expected. "I heard what you said quite clearly, Your Grace. You heard a fragment of a complex arrangement and leapt to conclusions that suited your preconceptions," he corrected. "Emily Harcourt's father approached me 6 months ago, desperate for assistance. His estates are heavily mortgaged, his investments have failed, and his creditors are circling. He offered his daughter's hand to my younger cousin, Lord Edmund Russell, in exchange for my financial intervention." Diana frowned, confused by this revelation. "And you agreed to this bargain?" "I agreed to settle his most pressing debts and restructure the remainder, yes. In return, Lord Harcourt promised his daughter to my cousin, who has admired her from afar for nearly a year." "That doesn't change the fundamental issue," Diana insisted, though with less certainty than before. "Emily is still being traded like property." The Duke sighed, a surprisingly human gesture from such a formidable figure. "Miss Fairfax, the match would save her family from destitution and provide her with security. My cousin is young, reasonably handsome, and completely besotted with her. There are far worse fates for a gentlewoman in her position." "Yet she resists," Diana pointed out. "She is young and has romantic notions fostered by too many novels," he replied dismissively. "She will come to see the wisdom of the match in time." Diana shook her head. "And if she doesn't? Will you force her hand?" The Duke's expression hardened. "I do not force women, Miss Fairfax, remember that." There was something in his tone that made Diana believe him, though she was loath to admit it. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "You owe me no explanations." He moved closer, close enough that Diana could see the varying shades of blue in his eyes, from pale ice at the edges to deeper cobalt near the pupils. "Because you interest me," he said simply. "Most of society cowers before my title. You challenged me without hesitation, defending a girl you barely know based on principle alone. It was refreshing." Diana wasn't sure how to respond to this unexpected admission. The Duke's proximity was distracting, making it difficult to maintain her composure. "So you aren't here to demand an apology," she managed. "Would you offer one if I did?" His voice had dropped lower, sending another inexplicable shiver through her. "No," Diana admitted. To her astonishment, he smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his severe features and made him appear years younger. "I thought not, which brings me to the true purpose of my visit." He withdrew an envelope from his inner coat pocket and held it out to her. An invitation. Diana accepted it cautiously, breaking the seal to find an elegantly penned invitation to a small dinner party at Silvermere House in 2 days' time. "You're inviting me to dine at your home?" she asked incredulously. "After I insulted you before half the ton." "Precisely because of that," he confirmed. "My sister, Lady Caroline Russell, is hosting. It will be an intimate gathering, no more than 12 guests. The Harcourts will attend, including Miss Emily. Perhaps you might form your own assessment of her situation." Diana stared at the invitation, thoroughly confused by this turn of events. "I don't understand you, Your Grace." "Few do," he replied, and there was something like weariness beneath his confident exterior. "Will you come?" She knew she should refuse. The Duke of Silvermere was dangerous, not in the way of rake-hells who seduced innocent maids, but in a deeper, more fundamental way. He represented everything she opposed: privilege without accountability, power without restraint, tradition without progress. Yet she was undeniably drawn to him, and not merely by his commanding presence. There was complexity beneath his aristocratic arrogance, glimpses of a mind that might perhaps be reasoned with. "Yes," she heard herself say, "I will come." Something flashed in his eyes, satisfaction perhaps, or triumph. "Excellent. My carriage will collect you at 7. Before she could protest this high-handed arrangement, he bowed precisely and moved toward the door. He paused on the threshold, turning back to her with that same enigmatic half-smile. "Until then, Miss Fairfax, I look forward to continuing our discussion." As he departed, exchanging brief pleasantries with her anxious family in the hallway, Diana sank onto a nearby settee, the invitation clutched in her hand. What had she done? More importantly, what game was the Duke playing? She recalled the intensity of his gaze, the way it made her feel simultaneously exposed and exhilarated. No man had ever looked at her with such focused attention, as though she were a puzzle he was determined to solve. Diana Fairfax, who prided herself on her independence and clear thinking, was forced to admit an uncomfortable truth. For the first time in her life, she was out of her depth, and the most disturbing part? A treacherous part of her was eager to wade into deeper waters still. Diana had changed her gown 3 times before settling on a creation of deep burgundy silk that her father had purchased during his diplomatic posting in Vienna. The colour was perhaps bolder than was strictly proper for an unmarried lady, but Diana had long since abandoned concerns about appearing conventional. As the Duke's carriage delivered her to the imposing facade of Silvermere House on Berkeley Square, Diana fought to control her nerves. The mansion was everything one would expect of a ducal residence in the heart of Mayfair, grand without being ostentatious, elegant yet unmistakably conveying power and wealth. A liveried footman handed her down from the carriage and escorted her up the marble steps. The entrance hall beyond was illuminated by a magnificent crystal chandelier, beneath which stood a woman Diana instantly recognized from her resemblance to the Duke, the same striking blue eyes, though set in a much warmer countenance. "Miss Fairfax," Lady Caroline Russell greeted her with genuine warmth. "How delightful to meet you at last. My brother has spoken of you." "Has he?" Diana could not keep the surprise from her voice. "All unflattering, I presume?" Lady Caroline laughed, a musical sound that echoed in the vast hall. "Quite the contrary. Robert rarely notices anyone enough to mention them, yet he spoke of you at some length." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "I believe you've made quite an impression." Before Diana could respond to this startling revelation, they were joined by a young man who shared Lady Caroline's colouring, but possessed a much more open, amiable expression. "Edmund, allow me to present Miss Diana Fairfax. Miss Fairfax, my son, Lord Edmund Russell." The young man bowed with an easy grace. "Miss Fairfax, I've heard all about your confrontation with my formidable cousin. Absolutely splendid. About time someone stood up to him." "Edmund!" his mother admonished, though her eyes twinkled. "Do not encourage rebellion in our guest." "Where is the Duke?" Diana asked, glancing around the entrance hall. "Attending to some business correspondence before dinner," Lady Caroline replied. "He asked that we proceed to the drawing room. The other guests have already arrived." The drawing room of Silvermere House was a study in refined elegance. Decorated in shades of blue and gold, with priceless artwork adorning the walls, it somehow managed to feel intimate despite its grandeur. Diana quickly assessed the assembled company. Lord and Lady Harcourt, their daughter Emily, several other peers and their wives, and an elderly gentleman with intelligent eyes whom Lady Caroline introduced as Dr. Frederick Henderson, the Duke's former tutor and longtime friend. Diana made her way to Emily Harcourt, who sat somewhat apart from the others, her delicate features drawn with obvious tension. "Miss Harcourt," Diana greeted her softly, "I don't know if you remember me. We met at Lady Westerfield's musical last month." The younger girl looked up with surprise. "Miss Fairfax, of course I remember. You were kind enough to rescue me when I could not recall the composer of the sonata being discussed." Diana smiled. "Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. A beautiful piece." "Indeed." Emily glanced nervously toward her parents, who were engaged in conversation with one of the peers. I heard what happened at the Lansdowne ball, that you defended me to the Duke." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "No one has ever stood up for me before." Something in the girl's tone struck a chord in Diana. "Is it true that you object to the match with Lord Edmund?" Emily's pale cheeks flushed. "I barely know him. And yet I am expected to pledge my life to him." She hesitated, then added in a rush, "They say it is my duty to save my family, that I am selfish to resist. Perhaps they are right." Diana studied the young woman thoughtfully. "And what do you think of Lord Edmund himself? Setting aside the circumstances, is he personally objectionable to you?" "No," Emily admitted. "He seems kind. He brought me flowers once and didn't mock me when I spilled tea in my nervousness." A ghost of a smile touched her lips at the memory. "But marriage should be based on deeper feelings, should it not? On mutual respect and love." "Ideally, yes," Diana agreed, "though such matches are rare in our circles." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the Duke. He entered the drawing room with the quiet authority that seemed to accompany him everywhere, immediately drawing all eyes. Diana noted how the other guests straightened imperceptibly in his presence, all except Dr. Henderson, who regarded his former pupil with obvious affection, untinged by deference. The Duke's gaze swept the room and locked with Diana's. For a moment, the same electricity she had felt at their previous encounters crackled between them. Then he crossed to where she sat with Emily, bowing to both ladies. "Miss Fairfax, I'm pleased you could join us. Miss Harcourt, you look enchanting this evening." Emily murmured a shy thanks, her eyes downcast. Diana, however, met his gaze directly. "Your home is magnificent, Your Grace, though I confess I'm still puzzled by my inclusion among your guests tonight." "All will become clear during dinner," he replied cryptically. "Speaking of which," he offered his arm to Diana with a slight smile. "Would you do me the honor?" Tradition dictated that the host escort the highest-ranking lady to dinner, not a baronet's daughter of modest means. Diana noted the surprise on the other guests' faces as she placed her hand on the Duke's arm. "You enjoy creating a spectacle, don't you?" she murmured, as he led her toward the dining room. "Only when it serves a purpose," he responded, his voice equally low. "And tonight it does." The dining room was as impressive as the rest of the house, dominated by a long mahogany table that could have seated 30, but was set for their intimate party of 12. Diana found herself placed at the Duke's right hand, a position of honor that drew speculative glances from the company. Across from her sat Lord Edmund, with Emily Harcourt beside him. As the first course was served, Diana observed the young couple surreptitiously. Lord Edmund made several gentle attempts to engage Emily in conversation, his manner respectful and attentive. The girl responded hesitantly at first, but gradually seemed to relax in his company. "You're watching them closely," the Duke noted, his voice pitched for Diana's ears alone. She turned to him, surprised by his perception. "I'm concerned for her happiness." "As am I," he replied, which was not the answer Diana expected. "Contrary to what you may believe, Miss Fairfax, I do not delight in forcing unhappy matches." Diana raised an eyebrow skeptically. "Yet you arranged this one." I facilitated a solution to the Harcourt's financial difficulties, he corrected. The match was Lord Harcourt's suggestion, not mine, and Edmund was quite enthusiastic about the prospect. But did anyone consider Emily's feelings? Diana pressed. The Duke's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes. That is partly why you are here tonight. Observe them, Miss Fairfax. Tell me what you see. Puzzled by his request, but intrigued nonetheless, Diana turned her attention back to Emily and Lord Edmund. As the dinner progressed, she noticed subtle changes in their interaction. Emily's responses became more animated, her shy smiles more frequent. When Lord Edmund leaned closer to share some observation that made her laugh softly, a genuine warmth suffused her features. They could suit, Diana admitted reluctantly, given time and proper acquaintance. But that doesn't justify the arrangement, the Duke finished for her. Perhaps not, but consider the alternatives, Miss Fairfax. Without intervention, the Harcourts would lose everything. Emily would be forced to seek employment as a governess or companion, positions that often lead to far greater suffering than an arranged marriage to a kind young man of means. Diana frowned. That may be true, but it doesn't make the current system just. Women should have more options than merely choosing which form of dependency to accept. To her surprise, the Duke did not immediately dismiss her argument. You speak of ideals, Miss Fairfax. Ideal in realities. The world as it is, not as we might wish it to be. Nothing changes if we all accept that philosophy, Diana countered. The world remains unjust because those with the power to change it refuse to do so. An interesting perspective, he murmured. Tell me, what would you do in my position? The question caught Diana off guard. She considered it seriously, aware that he was watching her with that same intense focus she found so unsettling. I would ensure Emily and Lord Edmund have adequate time to become acquainted before any formal engagement, she said finally. If, after a reasonable period, she remains opposed to the match, I would find another solution to the Harcourt's financial troubles, one that doesn't require bartering their daughter. And what might that solution be? Diana hesitated. I'm not familiar enough with their circumstances to say precisely. Perhaps a long-term loan with favourable terms, secured against their estates. The Duke nodded thoughtfully. A reasonable approach. In fact, it's not dissimilar to what I've already arranged. What do you mean? He took a sip of wine before answering. The formal engagement between Emily and Edmund has been delayed for 6 months, during which time they will be permitted to become better acquainted through properly chaperoned outings. Meanwhile, I've restructured Lord Harcourt's debts to prevent immediate foreclosure. Diana stared at him in astonishment. But at the Lansdowne ball you said— I said the papers were signed, he confirmed. The financial arrangements, not a marriage contract. And I said her father had agreed to the match, which he has. I never claimed the matter was settled beyond possibility of alteration. You deliberately misled me, Diana accused, though her indignation was tempered by confusion. I expressed myself in terms that Lord Kensington would understand and approve, the Duke corrected. Had you not been eavesdropping, you would have heard the full explanation I offered him later. Diana felt a flush of embarrassment creep up her neck. Why didn't you explain this when I confronted you? The Duke's mouth curved into that enigmatic half-smile. Would you have believed me, or would you have dismissed any explanation as the self-serving justification of a tyrant? Diana opened her mouth to protest, then closed it again. He was right. In that moment of righteous anger, she would not have accepted any defense he offered. So the entire confrontation was based on a misunderstanding, she said slowly. Not entirely, he replied. Your assessment of my character was quite clear and not wholly inaccurate. I'm accustomed to command, Miss Fairfax. I do expect obedience from those under my authority. The difference lies in how I exercise that authority. Before Diana could respond, Lady Caroline signalled for the ladies to withdraw, leaving the gentlemen to their port and cigars. As they settled in the drawing-room, Diana found herself the object of curious glances and hushed speculation. Lady Harcourt approached, her manner cool but not openly hostile. Miss Fairfax, I understand you took an interest in my daughter's welfare at the Lansdowne ball. Diana straightened her spine. I spoke in haste, Lady Harcourt, without full understanding of the situation. If my words caused offence, I apologize. The older woman studied her for a moment. My daughter tells me you've been kind to her. She has few friends in society. Her shyness makes it difficult for her to form attachments. She hesitated, then added more softly, I want her to be happy, Miss Fairfax. Whatever you may think, no mother wishes to see her child suffer. Of course not, Diana agreed, somewhat chastened by the woman's evident sincerity. And I believe Lord Edmund seems genuinely fond of her. He is a good young man, Lady Harcourt nodded, not unlike his father was at that age. The Russell men may appear stern, but they are steadfast and honourable. Diana was saved from having to respond to this oblique reference to the Duke by Emily herself, who approached tentatively. Miss Fairfax, might I speak with you privately? The girl asked, glancing nervously toward her mother. Lady Harcourt hesitated, then nodded. Just there by the window. I shall be watching, mind you. Once they were seated on a small settee partially concealed by heavy velvet curtains, Emily clasped Diana's hands tightly. I must tell you something, she whispered urgently. After the Lansdowne ball, when word spread of your confrontation with the Duke, Lord Edmund came to call on me. He was different, more forthright than before. In what way? Diana asked, concerned. A faint blush colored Emily's pale cheeks. He said he'd heard how you defended me, and it made him realize he had been too passive in his courtship. He told me, her voice dropped even lower, that he had admired me since we were introduced last autumn, but feared his attention was unwelcome because of my reserve. And was it? Diana prompted gently. Emily's blush deepened. I thought him handsome from the first, but father had impressed upon me the importance of the match so severely that I felt trapped, as though my feelings were irrelevant to the arrangement. She looked up with unexpected determination in her soft brown eyes. Lord Edmund promised me that if, after 6 months of acquaintance, I truly could not bear the thought of marriage to him, he would release me from the engagement himself, regardless of his uncle's wishes. Diana's eyebrows rose in surprise. He would defy the Duke for your sake. He said some principles transcend even family loyalty, Emily replied, and that a marriage should be founded on mutual respect and affection, not obligation. A shy smile touched her lips. His words, not mine. Diana sat back, thoroughly confused by this revelation. The picture of the Duke as an unfeeling tyrant that she had constructed was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. If he had raised his nephew to hold such views, the gentleman rejoined them shortly thereafter, and Diana found herself conversing with Dr. Henderson, the Duke's former tutor. The elderly scholar possessed a sharp mind and progressive views that surprised her. I've always believed education should be equally available to both sexes, he told her when she mentioned her brother's studies at Oxford. The female mind is every bit as capable as the male, often more so in my experience. A radical position, Doctor, Diana observed. Did you share these views with your ducal pupil? Dr. Henderson chuckled. Indeed I did, though Robert was a challenging student in those days. Brilliant but stubborn, with a tendency to question everything. His father, the previous Duke, was a harsh disciplinarian who believed knowledge should be acquired through rote memorization. I favored Socratic debate. His eyes twinkled. The old Duke nearly dismissed me when he discovered I was encouraging his heir to think for himself. Yet you remained his tutor, Diana noted. Thanks to Robert himself, the doctor confirmed. At 14, he informed his father that if I were dismissed, he would refuse to continue his studies with anyone else. It was the first time he openly defied the Duke. The old man's expression softened with remembrance. The boy had a strong sense of justice even then. It's still there, though perhaps obscured by the weight of his responsibilities. Diana glanced across the room to where the Duke stood in conversation with Lord Harcourt. You paint a different picture of him than society does, Doctor. Society sees the Duke of Silvermere, Dr. Henderson replied. I remember the boy Robert, who stayed up all night tending a lame hunting dog that the kennel master had condemned to be put down. By morning, he'd fashioned a splint for the creature's leg and convinced his father to spare it. He smiled at Diana's evident surprise. People are rarely as simple as we first judge them to be, Miss Fairfax. As the evening progressed, Diana found herself repeatedly drawn into the Duke's orbit. They exchanged observations on politics, literature, even the controversial topic of the new railway lines spreading across England. To her astonishment, she discovered that while his views were certainly conservative in many respects, he was not blindly opposed to progress. "Change is inevitable," he remarked during one such conversation. "The question is whether it will be guided by thoughtful consideration or driven by chaos." "And who decides what constitutes thoughtful consideration?" Diana challenged. "Those with the wisdom and experience to weigh consequences beyond the immediate moment," he replied without hesitation. "Which conveniently tends to be men of your rank and station," she countered. Instead of taking offense, he regarded her with that now familiar intensity. "Not always. Wisdom is not the exclusive province of any class. I have met foolish peers and sage commoners. Yet the former govern while the latter obey," Diana pointed out. "For now," he conceded, surprising her yet again. "But the world is changing, Miss Fairfax, whether we wish it or not. Those who cannot adapt will be swept aside." When the time came for the guests to depart, Diana found herself lingering, reluctant to end their conversation. The Duke appeared equally disinclined to see her leave, for he suggested a tour of his art collection, an unusual request at such a late hour, but one that Lady Caroline supported with a knowing smile that made Diana blush inexplicably. "You needn't accompany us, Caroline," the Duke told his sister. "I'm certain Miss Fairfax will preserve my reputation." Lady Caroline laughed. "It's your guest's reputation I'm concerned with, Robert. But very well, I shall bid our remaining guests good night. Do not keep Miss Fairfax too late. Her father will be concerned." Once they were alone in the long gallery that housed the Silvermere collection, Diana felt a strange tension between them, not uncomfortable, but charged with possibility. "You arranged this entire evening to change my opinion of you," she said as they paused before a magnificent landscape by Turner. The Duke did not deny it. "I arranged it to show you the truth, rather than the caricature you had constructed." "Why?" Diana turned to face him directly. "Why does my opinion matter to you?" He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Perhaps because you are one of the few people who dared to express an honest opinion at all." Diana wasn't satisfied with this answer. There must be more to it than that. The Duke moved closer, close enough that Diana could see the subtle variations of color in his eyes, the faint lines at their corners that suggested he was not as impassive as he appeared. "From our first encounter, you have challenged me, questioned me, refused to yield to my rank or reputation," he said softly. "Do you know how rare that is? I am surrounded by people who either fear me or want something from me. You alone spoke to me as a man, not a title." The intensity of his gaze made Diana's heart race. "I spoke to you as an arrogant tyrant," she reminded him, though her voice lacked conviction. "You spoke to me as an equal," he corrected, "and in doing so, you saw me, not the Duke, but the man beneath." Diana swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how alone they were in the vast gallery, how improper their proximity, yet she couldn't bring herself to step away. "And what man is that?" she whispered. Something changed in his expression, a softening, a vulnerability she would never have believed him capable of. A man who has spent his life constrained by duty and expectations, who was taught from childhood that personal desires must always be sacrificed for the sake of position and responsibility. His voice dropped lower, a man who, until recently, had forgotten what it meant to want something for himself alone. "And what do you want?" Diana hardly recognized her own voice, breathless and uncertain. The Duke reached out slowly, giving her ample time to withdraw, and brushed a stray curl from her cheek. His touch was feather-light, yet it sent a shiver through her entire body. "I think you know," he murmured. The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken possibility. Diana knew she should step back, maintain the proper distance, but she remained motionless, held captive by his gaze. "Your Grace," she began. "Robert," he interrupted, "when we are alone at least, I would hear my name on your lips." The intimacy of the request made her cheeks flush. "Robert," she amended, the name feeling strange and wonderful all at once. "This is unprecedented." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "In my experience, unprecedented events are often the most significant." Diana gathered her courage. "What exactly are you proposing?" "At this moment, nothing improper," he assured her, though the heat in his eyes suggested otherwise. "But I would like permission to call on you tomorrow, properly, with your father's knowledge and consent." "To what end?" Diana pressed, needing clarity. "To better acquaintance," he replied, "to discovering whether this connection between us might develop into something more lasting." Diana's mind raced. The Duke of Silvermere, Robert, was effectively declaring his interest in courting her. It was beyond anything she could have imagined when she confronted him at the Lansdowne ball. The practical considerations alone were staggering. The social gulf between them was vast. Society would be scandalized. Some would claim she had entrapped him. And yet, there was something between them, an understanding, a recognition that transcended conventional courtship. When he looked at her, Diana felt truly seen for perhaps the first time in her life. "My father will think you've taken leave of your senses," she said finally. Robert's smile widened. "Possibly, but I believe he will consent nonetheless." "You seem very confident," Diana observed, regaining some of her usual spirit. "In some things," he agreed, "but not in your answer. Will you receive me, Diana?" The sound of her given name on his lips sent another shock through her system. It was forward, improper, and thrilling. "Yes," she heard herself say, "yes, I will receive you." The smile that illuminated his features transformed him completely, erasing years of reserve and restraint. In that moment, Diana glimpsed the man Dr. Henderson had described, the boy with a sense of justice and compassion beneath the ducal mantle. "Then I shall call at 2 tomorrow," he said, "and now, reluctantly, I must return you to your father's house before your reputation is beyond salvaging." As they walked back toward the entrance hall, Diana felt as though she were moving through a dream. Everything had changed in ways she could not have anticipated. The Duke, Robert, was not the villain she had believed him to be, nor was she immune to his particular form of magnetism. "One question," she said, as they reached the foot of the grand staircase. "That look you gave me at the Lansdowne ball after I defied you. What did it mean?" Robert paused, considering her question with characteristic thoroughness. "Recognition," he said finally. "I recognize something in you that I had been searching for without knowing it." His eyes held hers. "A spirit that would not yield to intimidation, a mind that would challenge my own, a heart that might, in time, beat in rhythm with mine." The poetic sentiment, so unexpected from such a seemingly pragmatic man, left Diana momentarily speechless. Before she could formulate a response, Lady Caroline rejoined them, effectively ending their private conversation. But as the Duke handed her into his carriage for the journey home, his fingers lingered against hers for a heartbeat longer than propriety allowed. In that brief touch, Diana felt the promise of something she had never sought, but suddenly found herself longing for with unexpected intensity. The game had indeed begun, but it was no longer one of opposition. It had transformed into something far more dangerous and exhilarating, a dance of hearts that could lead to either transcendent joy or devastating heartbreak. And Diana, who had always prided herself on her independence, was no longer certain which outcome she feared more. The weeks that followed transformed Diana's life in ways she could never have anticipated. True to his word, Robert called upon her the next day, formally requesting Sir William's permission to court his daughter. Her father's astonishment had quickly given way to barely concealed delight at the prospect of such an advantageous connection. Society's reaction was predictably tumultuous. Some declared it a romantic triumph, the cold Duke finally touched by love. Others whispered of scandal and impropriety, suggesting Diana had somehow engineered the situation to her advantage. The most vicious rumors implied that she had compromised herself to secure his interest, a notion so absurd that Diana might have laughed had it not been so insulting. Through it all, Robert remained steadfast. He escorted her to the theatre, to musical evenings, to carefully selected social gatherings where his presence ensured she was treated with respect, if not genuine acceptance. In private moments, always properly chaperoned but occasionally affording brief exchanges beyond others' hearing, they continued their spirited debates on everything from politics to literature. Diana discovered depths to him that society never glimpsed. Behind his reserved exterior lay a keen intelligence, dry wit, and deeply held principles that had been shaped by the weight of responsibility he had carried since inheriting the dukedom at 23. Today they were walking in the gardens behind Silvermere House, Lady Caroline following at a discreet distance, that allowed for conversation without compromising propriety. "Edmund tells me Emily smiled throughout their entire ride in the Row yesterday," Robert remarked. "It appears your assessment was correct. Given time to become acquainted properly, they suit very well." Diana nodded, pleased by this development. Emily confided that she finds him unexpectedly charming when he forgets to be nervous in her company. "I believe there may be genuine affection developing between them." "Thanks in no small part to your intervention," Robert acknowledged. "Had you not challenged me so publicly, I might not have recognized the need to adjust my approach." Diana raised an eyebrow. "Are you actually admitting that you were wrong?" "I'm admitting that your perspective had merit," he corrected with a hint of his old arrogance. "Not quite the same thing." She laughed softly. "Heaven forbid the Duke of Silvermere should acknowledge error. The man Robert, however, is not above such admissions," he said more seriously, "at least not to you." His words stirred that now familiar warmth in Diana's chest. Over the past weeks, she had become increasingly aware of the distinction he drew between his public persona and the private self he revealed only to her. It was a privilege she had come to treasure. They walked in comfortable silence for a moment before Robert spoke again. "I've received word that Lord Blackwell has been spreading particularly malicious rumors regarding our association." Diana sighed. "I expected as much. He was among my most persistent suitors before you and I. Before we—" She fumbled for the appropriate term to describe their relationship, which still lacked formal definition. "Before I claimed your attention," Robert supplied smoothly. "His wounded pride seeks vengeance." "His wounded pride never had any chance of success," Diana corrected firmly. "Lord Blackwell represents everything I find distasteful in the modern gentleman, superficial charm concealing a complete lack of substance." Robert's expression softened in that way that made Diana's heart flutter traitorously. "And what do you find in me, Diana? I wonder." She glanced away, suddenly shy despite their growing intimacy. "You know very well what I think of you." "I know what you thought of me when we first met," he countered. "I'm less certain of your current assessment." Diana stopped beside a marble fountain, gathering her courage. "I think you are complex, more so than I initially believed. You can be authoritative to the point of arrogance, yet you listen when challenged. You uphold tradition, yet you're not blind to the need for progress." She met his gaze directly. "You are not the villain I painted you to be, nor are you the paragon your position might suggest." "A fair evaluation," he acknowledged. "And does this complex, imperfect man hold any place in your regard?" The directness of the question made Diana's cheeks flush. "You know he does." Robert moved closer, close enough that Diana could smell the now familiar scent of sandalwood that clung to his clothing. "I would hear it spoken," he said softly. "After all, you once declared quite publicly that you pitied any woman subject to my authority." Diana winced at the memory. "I was wrong," she admitted. "Not about all men of your rank and station, perhaps, but about you specifically." She took a deep breath. "You have shown me consideration and respect. You have listened to my opinions, even when they differed from your own, and you have never once attempted to subjugate my will to yours." "I would not wish to change the very qualities that drew me to you," he said, his voice deepening. "Your spirit, your independence, your unwillingness to yield to intimidation, these are precious to me." Diana's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "Robert," she began, then faltered, unsure how to express the tumult of emotions he evoked in her. He seemed to understand without words, for his expression softened further. "I have something to show you," he said. "Something I've shared with no one else." Curious, Diana followed, as he led her toward a small garden pavilion partially concealed by flowering shrubs. Lady Caroline, noting their destination, moved to a nearby bench where she could observe them without hearing their conversation. Inside the pavilion, Robert withdrew a slender volume from his coat pocket. The leather binding was worn, suggesting frequent handling. "What is this?" Diana asked as he placed it in her hands. "My private thoughts," he replied simply, "recorded over the years since I became Duke." Diana opened the journal carefully, aware of the profound trust this represented. The pages were filled with neat, decisive handwriting, reflections, observations, and occasionally poetry. She paused at a passage dated nearly 3 years earlier. The weight of this title grows heavier, not lighter, with time. Each decision affects countless lives, yet I must make these choices in isolation, maintaining the appearance of certainty, even when doubt consumes me. The Duke cannot show weakness. The man beneath craves connection, understanding, someone who sees beyond the coronet to the flawed human who bears it. Diana looked up, deeply moved by this glimpse into his private struggles. "Why show me this?" Robert's expression was more vulnerable than she had ever seen it. "Because I want you to know me, truly know me, before I ask what I intend to ask." Her pulse quickened. "And what is that?" Instead of answering directly, he guided her to another page, dated just weeks earlier, shortly after their confrontation at the Lansdowne ball. "She defied me publicly, challenged beliefs I've held unquestioned for years." Her eyes flashed with righteous indignation, utterly unconcerned with my rank or power. In that moment of defiance, I felt something long dormant awaken. Not anger, though perhaps I should have felt it, but recognition. Here at last was a spirit to match my own, not in submission but in strength. I find myself thinking of her constantly, replaying her words, recalling the flush of passion on her cheeks. Have I finally found her? The one who could walk beside me rather than behind or before? The one who would neither bow to my title nor be crushed by its weight? Diana's hands trembled slightly as she read the words. They echoed her own confused emotions following their first encounter, the inexplicable connection, the sense of recognition that had transcended her initial judgment of him. "Robert," she whispered, "I don't know what to say." He took the journal gently from her hands, closing it before meeting her gaze with unwavering intensity. "Say that you understand what I'm offering, not merely the position or the privilege, but myself, the man, not the Duke. Say that you might consider accepting despite all the complications such an alliance would entail." Diana's mind raced. He was speaking of marriage, a possibility she had begun to consider in recent weeks, but had not dared articulate even to herself. The practical barriers were formidable. As Duchess, she would be subject to expectations and constraints that ran counter to everything she had valued in her independent life. "I would not be a conventional Duchess," she said finally. "I cannot promise to subjugate my opinions or principles for the sake of position." "I would not ask it of you," he replied without hesitation. "Indeed, it would be a profound disappointment if you did. What I need is not a decorative consort but a partner, someone who will challenge me when necessary, support me when appropriate, and always speak truth even when I may not wish to hear it." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. This was not the calculated proposal of a man seeking an advantageous match, but the heartfelt request of one who had found something unexpected and precious. "Society would have much to say about such an unconventional arrangement," Diana noted, though her tone lacked conviction. "Society will always find something to criticize," Robert dismissed. "I have spent my life meeting its expectations. In this one matter I choose to follow my own judgment." Diana studied him, this complex man who had transformed from adversary to suitor through a remarkable journey of mutual discovery. The Duke of Silvermere still possessed the authority and pride that had initially repelled her, but she now understood the weight of responsibility that had shaped those qualities. Moreover, she had glimpsed the man beneath, thoughtful, principled, and capable of growth. More significantly, she had discovered her own feelings that had evolved from antagonism to respect to something far deeper and more profound. When had it happened? Perhaps during their spirited debates, or in those moments when his guard lowered and he showed her glimpses of the boy Dr. Henderson had described, or in the countless small ways he had demonstrated his regard for her mind as well as her person. "You haven't actually asked me anything yet," she pointed out, a hint of her characteristic spirit returning despite the emotional intensity of the moment. A genuine smile transformed his features, that rare, unguarded expression that made him appear younger and more approachable. "Ever precise, Miss Fairfax." He took her hand in his touch warm and steady. "Diana, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not because I am a duke or you are a suitable match, but because we have found in each other something neither of us expected to find. A meeting of minds, a recognition of spirits, perhaps even," he hesitated briefly, "a joining of hearts." The words were spoken with such sincerity that Diana felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. Here was no command, no assumption of compliance, but a genuine question asked by a man who, for perhaps the first time in his adult life, was uncertain of the outcome. In that moment, Diana realized that the journey from their first contentious meeting to this quiet pavilion had changed not only her understanding of him, but her understanding of herself. She had always defined her identity in opposition to conventional expectations, refusing to bow, to submit, to conform. But true independence, she now recognized, lay not in reflexive defiance, but in the courage to choose one's own path, even when that path surprised oneself. "Yes," she said finally, her voice strong despite the emotion constricting her throat. "Yes, Robert, I will marry you." The transformation that came over his face was remarkable, joy, relief, and something deeper that made Diana's heart race. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a fervent kiss to her knuckles that sent a shiver of anticipation through her body. "You have made me happier than I dared hope possible," he murmured against her skin. Diana smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. "I believe I may have done the same for myself." The sound of Lady Caroline's discreet cough from outside the pavilion reminded them of propriety's constraints. With obvious reluctance, Robert released Diana's hand, though his eyes still held hers with an intensity that promised much for their future. "Shall we share our news with Caroline?" he suggested. "She has been insufferably smug about her matchmaking instincts since the night of the dinner party." Diana laughed softly. "I suppose she deserves some credit. Without her invitation, we might still be adversaries." "I think not," Robert replied, with unexpected certainty. "Some connections, Diana, are inevitable. Had we not met at the Lansdowne ball, fate would have found another opportunity." He offered his arm with a formality belied by the warmth in his eyes. "I believe we were destined to challenge each other, from the moment you were born with that remarkable spirit, and I with my stubborn pride." As they emerged from the pavilion to share their news with an obviously delighted Lady Caroline, Diana reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this point. From a heated confrontation born of misunderstanding to a partnership founded on mutual respect and growing affection, it was a transformation neither could have anticipated. The Duke of Silvermere had not changed entirely. He remained authoritative, proud, and occasionally high-handed, but the man Robert had revealed depths of compassion, vulnerability, and capacity for growth that complemented Diana's own strengths and weaknesses in unexpected ways. And Diana, who had once declared she pitied any woman subject to his authority, had discovered that love did not require submission, but rather created a new kind of freedom, the freedom to be fully herself, recognized and valued for the very qualities that had once set her apart. As they walked back toward the house, their future stretching before them with all its challenges and promises, Diana felt Robert's hand close over hers where it rested on his arm, a gesture both protective and equalizing. "You realize," she murmured, "that I shall continue to challenge you when I believe you're wrong." "I would expect nothing less," he replied, the corner of his mouth lifting in that half-smile she had come to cherish. "Indeed, I shall rely upon it." In that simple exchange lay the foundation of their uncommon union. Not a marriage of convenience or duty, but a partnership of minds and hearts that would reshape both their lives in ways neither could fully imagine. The spirited woman who had rejected the Duke's commands had indeed been enslaved, not by his authority but by the recognition of a kindred spirit beneath the aristocratic facade. And the Duke, who had commanded the obedience of all he encountered, had finally surrendered his heart to the one woman who had dared to defy him, finding in that surrender a freedom and joy he had never known possible. 1 year later, the grand ballroom of Silvermere House blazed with light, the celebration of the Duke and Duchess's first anniversary drawing the cream of society, despite the scandal their match had initially provoked. Diana stood near the same spot where Robert had once discussed Emily Harcourt's fate, observing the gathering with a smile of satisfaction. Emily herself, now Lady Edmund Russell following her spring wedding, danced with her husband, her former shyness replaced by quiet confidence. Lord and Lady Harcourt, their financial situation stabilized through Robert's intervention, conversed comfortably with other guests, the shadow of impending ruin long dispelled. "Contemplating your handiwork," came Robert's voice as he approached, offering Diana a glass of champagne. "Our handiwork," she corrected, accepting the drink. "Who would have thought that one confrontation could lead to so much happiness?" Robert's gaze softened as it always did when they were together. "I knew from that first moment, when you looked at me with such magnificent disdain, that you would change my life. I simply didn't realize how completely." Diana laughed softly. "And I never imagined that the man I considered the embodiment of aristocratic arrogance would become my greatest ally." "Ally, confidant, husband," Robert enumerated, taking her free hand in his. "And still occasionally arrogant, as you remind me with gratifying regularity." "Someone must keep you humble," she teased. "The burden of a dukedom tends to inflate one's sense of importance." His smile deepened. "A burden made infinitely lighter by sharing it with you." The year of their marriage had indeed transformed them both. Robert had maintained his authority while learning to consider perspectives beyond the narrow confines of his rank and upbringing. Diana had preserved her independence while discovering the joy of partnership with a man who valued her mind as much as her heart. Together, they had begun cautious reforms on the Silvermere estates, establishing a school that educated both boys and girls, improving conditions for tenants, and using Robert's influence in the House of Lords to advocate for measured progress rather than blind adherence to tradition. Society had eventually accepted their unconventional union, particularly as Diana proved herself a duchess of uncommon intelligence and grace, if not always strict adherence to protocol. The ton might raise eyebrows when she expressed political opinions or defended causes they considered inappropriate for a lady's attention, but Robert's unwavering support silenced the worst critics. "Shall we dance?" he suggested now, setting aside their glasses. "I believe they're playing the waltz that was performed the night you first rejected my commands." "And received that look that enslaved my heart," Diana completed, allowing him to lead her onto the floor. "Though I didn't recognize it as enslavement at the time, nor did I recognize it as love," Robert admitted, as they took their positions. "I knew only that you had awakened something I had long suppressed, a hunger for genuine connection beyond duty and position." As they moved across the floor in perfect harmony, Diana reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The path had not always been smooth. They still argued, passionately at times, but always with respect and a willingness to consider each other's viewpoint. Their differences, which might have driven others apart, had become the foundation of their strength together. "What are you thinking?" Robert asked, noting her contemplative expression. Diana smiled up at him, her heart full. "That sometimes the greatest act of independence is choosing to bind oneself to another, when that bond elevates rather than diminishes both parties." Robert's arm tightened slightly around her waist. "And has our bond elevated you, my unconventional duchess? Do you ever regret exchanging your independence for a title and the restrictions it carries?" "Never," Diana replied without hesitation. "For I haven't exchanged independence for a title. I've found a new kind of freedom in partnership with you." She held his gaze steadily. "And you? Do you regret binding yourself to a woman who challenges your every decree?" "Only on Tuesdays," he replied, with that dry humor she had come to treasure. Then, more seriously, "You are the greatest blessing of my life, Diana. You've brought light and purpose where there was only duty and obligation." As the music swelled around them, Diana recognized the truth of their unlikely journey. She had rejected the Duke's commands that fateful night at the Lansdowne ball, but in doing so had set in motion a transformation neither could have foreseen. The look that had enslaved her heart had not been one of domination, but of recognition, one soul recognizing its counterpart across a crowded room. And in that recognition, both had found not subjugation but liberation, the freedom to be fully themselves, accepted and cherished precisely for the qualities that set them apart. As Robert guided her through the final turns of the dance, Diana knew with absolute certainty that their story was just beginning. The lioness and her duke would continue to challenge each other, support each other, and grow together for all the years to come, writing their own rules for a marriage founded not on convention, but on the rarest and most precious of connections, a true meeting of hearts and minds. The end. Dear listener, the embers of our story still glow in the darkness as Diana and Robert find their way home to each other. But what about your journey? You've navigated decades of life's winding paths, some smooth, others jagged with unexpected turns. There's a particular courage that only emerges in life's second act. It's not the brash boldness of youth, but something finer, a quiet certainty that comes from having survived disappointments and celebrated triumphs. Like weathered hands that can still create beauty, you carry this distinct strength. When the Duke finally saw Diana clearly, he discovered something society had overlooked. I wonder how many have missed the remarkable person you've become, the one who learned to laugh at setbacks, who knows that forgiveness saves the forgiver first, who understands that true elegance isn't perfection but grace amid imperfection. Tonight, as silence envelops your room, remember this: your value has never diminished with age, it has compounded. While others chase fleeting pleasures, you've earned something far more precious: the ability to distinguish between what matters and what merely glitters. Your hands may bear the marks of time, but they're all the more beautiful for having held others through grief, applauded others' successes, and created moments of meaning. Your heart, perhaps bruised by loss or disappointment, still beats with remarkable resilience, a testament to your enduring spirit. When sleep evades you, know that the darkness holds no power over a soul that has learned to find light within itself. Your life story contains chapters of wisdom that the young can only hope to someday write. May you rest wrapped in the certainty that you are not merely surviving these days, you are illuminating them. Your presence in this world matters in ways both seen and unseen. The tapestry of your life continues to unfold, in patterns too intricate to be captured in youth alone. Sleep deeply, dream vividly, and wake tomorrow knowing that, like the finest wine, you've only grown richer with the passing years. With profound admiration for the masterpiece that is your continuing story, Legends of the Fall Team. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end of this story. We hope Diana and the Duke of Silvermere reminded you that love can be both strength and surrender, that true partnership means being seen, challenged, and cherished for who we are. If this tale touched your heart, please subscribe, like, comment, and share it to help our channel grow. From the bottom of our hearts, your support keeps us motivated to keep telling new stories, stories filled with love, redemption, and unforgettable twists. And don't leave just yet. At the end of this video, another story from our channel will appear. Click and be surprised by another moving tale just as emotional and beautiful as this one. Thank you for being here. The Legends of the Fall Team.